Hello, folks. If you have a moment, I'd like to ask you to sit with me for a little while. I have a story to tell, and it's a simple one. Just the story of a life like mine, the life of a father. This isn't some loud, flashy tale, nothing that would get thousands of likes on mine. There are no special heroes in it. It's just about an old man who smokes fish down by the bridge in our little harbor town. And his son, a son who once stayed away from his parents because of that smell. But before I begin, let me talk for just a minute about family, about that thing we all have. In this day and age, maybe family isn't held in the same way it used to be. Folks drift apart so easily these days. We get caught up in the hustle, and it's so easy to just say, I'm busy. Work, money, keeping up appearances, those things often come first. And parents? Sometimes they get left behind, like an old, faded photograph on the wall that nobody notices anymore. I'm not casting blame. I was a kid once myself, and when you're a kid, is there anyone who truly forgets the lines in their father's smile or the feel of their mother's worn, wrinkled hands? But the most frightening thing, it isn't forgetting. It's when you start to feel ashamed of where you came from, of how you were raised. There are children who will deny the years of sacrifice their parents made for them, all because of the smell of fish on their clothes, because of a faded work shirt, or because they grew up in a little clapboard house with a patched-up roof. And by the time you realize what you've lost, your parents might not have the strength left to wait for you. So today, let me tell you my story. Not to hold a grudge, and not to ask anyone to change their ways. I'm only hoping that, if there's anyone out there, anyone in a situation like mine, or like my son's, maybe you'll just stop for a moment. After you've heard my story to the end, I just want you to ask yourself one question. Have I forgotten the one who stood in the wind and the rain for me? Who painstakingly smoked the salmon that put food on my table? If you're ready, then please, listen to what I have to say. My story starts with a smell, and it ends with an apology. Please, lend me your ear. Let me begin with a smell. It's not the scent of flowers or some expensive cologne, nothing like what the young people seem to like these days. It's the smell of smoked fish, the smell of sea salt and alderwood, of fresh salmon hanging on bamboo racks, slowly turning a deep, rich amber under the Storie sun. It's the smell that has been with me for my entire working life, nearly 40 years now, and if I'm being honest, I think it's the smell of my life itself. My name is Arthur Morgan. I'm 67 years old. My wife, Sarah, and we run a little seafood shack down by the oldest fish market in town. It's not much. Just a few old wooden tables and chairs, a big smoker out front, and some wooden racks where we hang the salmon, the herring, the cod to cure. I prepare it all myself, with my own 2 hands. Starting before the sun even thinks about rising. Folks around here often call me Smoky Art. It's not because I sell more smoked salmon than anyone else. It's just that the smell, well, over the years, it's soaked right into me. Into my skin, my hair, my clothes. No matter how many showers I take, sometimes a customer will come into the shop and say with a little laugh, "Well, smells like fish in here, Art." I don't mind. In fact, I'm proud of it. That smell is the mark of an honest day's work. It's proof that I've lived a hard life, but an upright one. It's the smell of money earned with sweat and my own 2 hands. That's what I always believed. But one day, I realized that smell was the very reason my son was ashamed to even talk about his father. My son, Michael, he's our only boy. He lives in Portland now. He went off to college there and never really came back. He visits, but not nearly as often as his mother would like. I remember the day Sarah and I drove him down to Portland to move him into his dorm. He grabbed my hand, his grip was so strong back then, and he looked at me with these bright, determined eyes. "Dad," he said, "I'm going to work so hard. One day, I'm going to start my own business, make a real name for myself, and you'll never have to smell like fish again." I just laughed and ruffled his hair. "You just make sure you do well, son. And if you get real successful, you can buy your old man a fancy seafood dinner in one of those big city restaurants." He smiled so wide then, so full of hope. But as the months turned into years, the phone calls became fewer and farther between. They turned into short text messages, and then even those became just one word: busy. At first, I figured he was just working hard, trying to make his way. Sarah and we didn't want to bother him. But deep down, we just wanted a call. It didn't have to be long. Just a, "Hey, the sun's out in Portland today," or "Did you guys eat yet?" Then one day, he called, completely out of the blue. His voice sounded happy, lighter than it had in a long time. "Dad," he said, "I have a girlfriend." Sarah, who was listening on the other phone, she started tearing up right away. She was so happy. I felt a quiet joy swell up in my chest. I was just about to ask, "So when do we get to meet her?" But then he hesitated. "But," he said, his voice dropping a little, "I don't think I can bring her home just yet." I was a little confused. "What's wrong? Is something the matter?" He was quiet for a few seconds. I could hear the city sounds in the background, a distant siren. Then, he finally spoke. "It's just, I'm worried she wouldn't be able to stand the smell. Of the house." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, the receiver pressed to my ear, speechless. I didn't answer right away. When I finally did, I tried to make my voice sound flat, like it didn't matter one bit. "Oh," I said. "I see." On the other end of the line, he scrambled to explain himself. "Dad, I don't mean it like that. I'm not looking down on you. It's just, people from the city. They're a little sensitive about things like that." I nodded. Even though he couldn't see me, a bitter lump formed in my throat. Right, people from the city. And I was just an old man who lived his whole life smelling of smoked fish and sea salt. After we hung up that day, my heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. It wasn't about the girl. It was that for the very first time, I truly understood that the work I'd taken so much pride in my entire life was a source of shame for my own son. A few afternoons later, a slow rain started to fall. It wasn't a heavy downpour, just a persistent drizzle that made the wind moan as it rattled the corrugated tin roof of the smokehouse. I sat under the eaves in my usual spot, sorting a fresh batch of herring, my hands moving automatically, turning and stacking the little silver fish. The cold, damp air was thick with the raw, briny smell of the sea. Sarah brought out a steaming mug of coffee and set it down gently beside me. "You seem tired today, Arthur," she said, her voice soft. I kept my eyes on the tray of fish, not looking up as I mumbled the words that had been sitting in my heart like stones. "Do you think we're an embarrassment to him, Sarah?" She stared at me, her eyes wide with surprise, but she didn't say a word. The wind howled softly around the corner of the shed. The sound of the raindrops tapping on the tin roof was the only answer I got. I had never spoken that fear out loud to anyone, not even to myself. But that day, I just couldn't hold it inside any longer. I never expected Michael to go around bragging about his old man's fish shack. I just didn't want him to deny it, to avoid it. To act like that part of his life, the part that included me, didn't exist. But that was only the beginning of the story. Less than a month after that phone call, he called again. This time, his voice was completely different. "Dad," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm coming home, and I'm bringing her to meet you and Mom." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "He didn't forget about us," she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. I nodded, a feeling of pure, simple happiness bubbling up in my chest for the first time in years. We turned the house upside down getting ready. We cleaned everything from top to bottom, washed the curtains, changed the sheets on the guest bed, scrubbed every corner of the kitchen, and I went down to the market to buy the best seafood I could find. I even prepared a special batch of my finest alder-smoked salmon, a beautiful, glistening side of it, just as a gift for her. It was strange, but I already felt a fondness for this girl I'd never even met. A little thought took root in my mind. Maybe with her around, Michael will come home more often. But that's just one part of the story. And perhaps it's a part I should save for another time. Because on that day, the day that was supposed to be the first joyful reunion, after so many years apart, I understood with painful clarity one simple thing. It wasn't the smell of fish that was breaking my heart. It was the indifference of my son. From the moment Michael said he was coming, our little house felt like it was Christmas morning. Sarah, who was usually so quiet, started humming to herself as she arranged wildflowers in a vase and polished every single window until it gleamed. I picked out the best cuts of cod and the fattest mackerel, and even got a small jar of salmon roe from an old fisherman friend of mine as a special treat. I remember that morning so clearly. The sky was a strange, perfect blue. The ocean was calm, and the air down at the dock smelled of sunshine and salt, and a kind of coiled-up tension. It's the first time he's ever brought a girl home, I murmured to myself. I just want her to feel like, even if it's small, it's a warm place. They arrived a little after noon. The moment the door opened, Sarah hurried to greet them. The young woman bowed her head slightly, then looked up with a bright smile. "It's so nice to finally meet you," she said. "I've never been to Astoria before. I'm a little nervous." Standing behind Sarah, I looked at her with my own shaky gaze. I'm a man of few words, not slick and smooth-tongued like folks from the city. But I know how to read people. I saw it right away. Her eyes were kind. Her voice was as gentle as a breeze, and her manners were warm and easy. All of it made the knot in my stomach loosen just a little. Michael just gave a short nod. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the living room before his face tightened into a frown. "Why, does it still smell like fish in here? I thought you said you cleaned up." My heart skipped a beat. I was carrying a platter of grilled cod at that very moment. My hand trembled slightly, but I forced a smile onto my face. "Sorry, son, we're old-fashioned. We're not used to all those air freshener sprays." He didn't answer me. Instead, he turned and whispered something to his girlfriend. But it was loud enough for me to hear. "I told you, didn't I? My family's a little rough around the edges." I pretended I hadn't heard and quietly set the platter down on the table. But to my complete surprise, the girl turned to me, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "I love the smell of smoked fish," she said. "When I was little, my dad used to smoke salmon for us. This smell brings back such wonderful memories." I looked up and met her eyes. There was nothing fake or forced in her expression. I could tell she meant every word. Throughout the meal that day, she was the one who kept the air from turning completely sour. She took a bite of the grilled mackerel and her eyes widened. "I've never tasted fish with such a deep, rich flavor before," she marveled. She followed Sarah into the kitchen to help with the dishes, insisting on washing them herself. "Please, let me," she said. "You have to teach me your trick for getting the fish smell off your hands." She even asked me to explain how to pick out the best salmon, her face full of genuine curiosity. She was so delighted by the freshness of everything. It made me so happy I nearly forgot how tired I was. Only my son, Michael, wore a sour expression all day. Every so often, he'd scowl, step outside to take a phone call, and then come back inside with a heavy sigh. But I pretended I didn't see it. For my wife's sake and for my own, I wanted to hold on to that last little sliver of belief, that last little bit of hope that things were all right. Before they left, I slipped out to the smokehouse. A few days earlier, I prepared a special gift for her. It was a bag of my candied salmon jerky. I'd made it myself, a 3-day process of brining, smoking, and glazing. Each piece was hand-cut, thick and sweet with a deep, smoky flavor from the alderwood. I'd wrapped it all in a clean paper bag, the kind we use at the shop, and tied it carefully with a simple piece of twine. I came back out onto the porch and handed it to her, my voice low. "Here," I said, "take this with you. It's some of the best we make at the shop. Something for the road?" She smiled as she bowed her head slightly, taking the bag with both hands. "Oh, thank you so much, Arthur. I absolutely love salmon jerky." But before she could even slip the bag into her purse, Michael stepped forward. In one quick, angry motion, he snatched it from her hands. He didn't say a word. He just threw the bag down hard onto the flagstone patio. "Stop with this backwoods crap," he snarled. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was stand there, the breath caught in my lungs. and watch as the little paper bag I had so carefully prepared lay on the cold stone. The twine had come undone. Half of the beautiful, glistening pieces of salmon I'd worked so hard on had spilled out. Now, smudged with dirt and grime from the patio floor, the air grew thick and heavy. It felt like even the sound of the wind rustling the leaves in the old oak tree had gone silent. My wife, Sarah, came out of the kitchen just then, a dish towel in her hands. She stopped dead in the doorway, her face a mask of confusion and shock. And the girl? She didn't get scared. She didn't get angry. Instead, she knelt down slowly. She gently gathered the spilled jerky, picking up each piece, and carefully placed them back in the bag. She brushed the dirt off the paper as best she could, then held the small parcel to her chest. "It's all right, Arthur," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the sudden, heavy silence. "I love it." Her voice was like a gentle rain falling on dry leaves. Her eyes were filled with a deep sadness, but there was no blame in them. Not for him, not for us. I didn't know what to feel. A wave of pity washed over me, followed by a hot flash of shame, then a surge of anger, and finally, a crushing sadness. All of it churned together in my chest, squeezing my heart until I could barely breathe. My son didn't even try to apologize. He just scowled, turned his face away from all of us and muttered, "Let's go." "It's getting late." The young woman bowed her head to us one last time. I found I didn't have the strength to say anything at all. I just stood there, my hands clenched into tight fists at my sides, and watched the two of them walk down the path, through the gate, and out of our lives once more. That night, a soft rain began to fall. It made a gentle tapping sound on the roof, the same sound I'd heard so many times before while I worked. But I wasn't sorting fish tonight. I was just sitting in my old armchair, quietly holding the little paper bag of salmon jerky that Sarah had wiped clean, as best she could. It still carried that faint, familiar smell, the smell that had been the backdrop to my entire life. But for some reason, tonight, that smell felt sharp, painful. It felt like it was carving something out of me. I whispered into the quiet darkness of the room, my voice so low it was barely a sound. "Is it really so shameful, son?" No one answered. There was only the lingering scent of smoked alder in the night air, and a kind of nameless ache that had settled deep into my bones. About 2 months went by after that day, the day Michael brought her home. Then, a small flat package arrived in the mail. There was no return address, just our names and address written on the front in a familiar hand. The moment I saw his handwriting, my heart gave a painful little jump. I opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a wedding invitation. I remember how my hands trembled. Why, I nearly dropped it. Sarah was standing beside me, and as soon as she saw the first few words, she brought her hand up to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief and a fragile, blooming hope. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock. The names of the bride and groom were embossed in shimmering gold letters. The ceremony was to be held at a 5-star hotel in downtown Portland. It was all so lavish, so expensive, so grand. But there was no line that read, "Together with their parents." There was no mention of the families of the bride and groom. Our names were nowhere on the page. In the space reserved for the groom's family, there was just nothing. There were only their 2 names, standing alone, as if the wedding had nothing to do with us, as if we didn't exist in our own son's life. I read it over and over again, searching for some line I had missed, some small note tucked inside. Parts. But there was nothing. It was all there, printed in perfect, elegant, cold script. No phone call, no verbal invitation, not even a quick text message. Not so much as the simple, obligatory word parents, written anywhere on that beautiful, cruel piece of paper. Sarah stood in silence, clutching the invitation as if it were a final, formal letter of rejection. I let out a long, slow breath. "We're not really invited," I said softly. "But we have to go, don't we, Sarah?" She didn't answer. She just gave a small, jerky nod, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That was the truth of it. Even if he wanted to forget us, even if he tried to erase us from his story. We couldn't abandon him. We couldn't. Because he was our son. On the morning of the wedding, I put on my best suit. It was old, the one I'd bought for my own wedding day all those years ago. But I'd kept it clean and pressed. Sarah wore a simple, hand-knitted sweater. The color had faded over the years, but it was warm. We took the early bus from Astoria to Portland. The whole way there, neither of us said a word. But a foolish, stubborn little flicker of hope still burned somewhere inside me. I hoped that when we got there he would see us and be happy. I hoped he would introduce us to his new friends, his new life. "These are my mom and dad," I imagined him saying. "They own a little seafood place back on the coast." Just that little bit of acknowledgement, I prayed he wouldn't leave. Us standing alone and isolated in that crowd of glittering, important people. The wedding was in a grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting a brilliant light over everything. The guests were all dressed immaculately, shaking hands and offering congratulations. The men were in expensive, tailored suits. The women wore designer dresses and high heels that clicked softly on the polished floor. When we stepped inside, no one greeted us. No one even turned to look. I quietly took Sarah's hand and led her to a small table in the very last row, in the farthest corner of the room, where we hoped no one would notice us. And then, I saw my son. He stood at the altar, next to his bride. He looked so distinguished, almost like a complete stranger. His face was bright, his hair was perfectly styled, and he wore an expensive, tailored tuxedo that fit him perfectly. The bride was radiant and beautiful, wearing the same gentle smile I would always remember. But then, his eyes scanned the crowd, and for a fleeting moment, they met mine. His expression hardened instantly. He walked over to us, his steps quick and sharp. He leaned in and spoke in a low, harsh whisper that only my wife and I could hear. "What are my parents doing here? I didn't invite you." Those words, they were like ice. It felt like a bucket of frigid water had been thrown in my face. I just sat there, frozen in silence. My wife did the same. She simply bowed her head, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. It wasn't because we were ashamed. It was just, the pain was too sharp, too sudden for us to say anything at all. Throughout the entire ceremony, my wife and I sat in the very last row, as quiet and unnoticed as two shadows. All around us, people were laughing, talking, taking pictures, and raising their glasses in toasts. Not a single person paid any mind to the two old people in their worn-out clothes, sitting quietly against the wall. From one of the tables up front, I could hear fragments of conversation, little whispers carried on the air. "Are those people from the country or something? Maybe they know someone on the catering staff? They look so out of place." I knew exactly who they were talking about. A moment later, I heard my son's voice. It was quiet, but laced with a clear, sharp annoyance as he spoke to someone beside him. "They're just so rustic." I didn't turn around. I just felt my own palms begin to tremble. It felt as if a giant hand had reached into my chest and was squeezing my heart. My wife's hand found mine and gripped it tightly. She didn't cry, but I could feel that her hand was colder than I had ever felt it before. I used to dream about his wedding day. I'd imagine myself grilling the best salmon from my own smokehouse, inviting all our closest friends. I'd see him, my son, throwing an arm around my shoulders and laughing, boasting to everyone. "This is my dad," I imagined him saying. "He smoked the best salmon in the whole state." But that wasn't how it was. I was nothing more than a lonely shadow at my own son's wedding. Unnamed, uninvited, unwelcome, and met with no smiles. There was only the sound of the wedding music swelling around me, and it seemed to drown out everything inside my heart. As soon as the ceremony was over, I didn't stay for the reception. I took my wife's hand, helped her to her feet, and the two of us walked quietly out of the grand ballroom and into the lobby. No one saw us off. No one even turned to look back. As we walked down the hotel steps, the Portland sky was already beginning to fade into evening. The last rays of sunlight reflected off the glass doors, and I had to squint against the glare. And then, I asked myself a question. What did I even come here for? No one gave me an answer, and I didn't expect one, because in that single crushing moment, I knew I had been completely and utterly erased from the chapter of the life of the son I had raised. Even after the ceremony had concluded, my wife and I remained seated in the last row. Not a single person had come over to say hello. There were no introductions, and no one asked who we were. It was as if, in the eyes of everyone there, we were nothing more than intruders, uninvited guests who had wandered in by mistake. I glanced over at my wife, Sarah. She was still silent, her hands clasped so tightly together that her knuckles were white. She clutched a handkerchief that was damp with sweat, but her face showed no emotion. Patience was her nature, a quality I had both admired and ached for during the decades we had spent together. I looked down at my own scuffed black shoes, the leather worn and cracked from years of wear, and I couldn't help but ask myself that question again. What did I even come here for? Was it to be publicly rejected by my own child? Was it to witness him begin his new life, a life completely devoid of his parents? Or was it just to confirm, with my own eyes, that I had truly been cast out from the life of the cold-hearted child who shared my blood? The reception began. The master of ceremonies announced with a booming, cheerful voice, "And now, let's welcome to the stage our wonderful, young, and successful bride and groom." I watched as my son walked onto the stage with a proud smile, standing beside his new wife under the brilliant, glittering crystal lights. The bride was gentle and beautiful, wrapped in a white gown, her face a mixture of shy happiness and calm grace. The MC offered a few words of thanks to the parents of both families, but he never mentioned any names. There was no specific thank you to the groom's parents, no nod in our direction, not even a glance toward the back of the room where we sat. I took a sip of water, but my throat was painfully dry, like I'd just swallowed a mouthful of sandpaper. Then, as if to put a perfect end to the reception, my son raised his glass and began to speak in a loud, clear voice. "I want to sincerely thank everyone who has walked with me and my wife toward our future. I especially want to thank my brothers at the company, who have watched me grow." I held my breath, waiting for just one word. That was all I needed. Just the single word, parents. But it never came. I lowered my head, staring at the untouched silverware on the table. There was just a vast, hollow emptiness inside my chest. And then, just as everyone was applauding, just as the MC was about to invite the guests to begin their meal, the bride suddenly stepped away from the microphone. She whispered something quietly to her husband. I saw a flicker of surprise and a frown cross my son's face, but after a moment, he gave a reluctant nod. I couldn't understand what was happening. Without another word, she turned and started walking down the steps of the stage. I could hear the soft whisper of her dress as it brushed against the ground, a trail of white silk gliding over the polished tiles. I heard the light, rhythmic click of her heels. I assumed she was heading to a dressing room, but she wasn't. She was, walking straight toward us. My wife and I looked at each other in confusion. Then, slowly, we stood up. And then, right there, in front of us, the bride bowed her head deeply. And then, she sank to her knees. Her kneeling brought the entire ballroom to a dead stop. The sudden silence was so complete that the clink of a single spoon against a china plate echoed through the grand hall. A few people gasped. I could hear someone whisper nearby, "What in the world? Who is that she's kneeling in front of?" I moved forward, my hands outstretched, fumbling to help her up, but she reached out and took my hand. Gripping it tightly, she looked up at me, her eyes red and swimming with tears. "Dad, Mom," she choked out. "Please, please forgive me." The words caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. Her face, it wasn't the gentle, happy expression of a bride. It was a mask of genuine, heart-wrenching conflict. I finally found my voice. "What? What are you doing, dear? Get up. What is all this about?" She struggled to speak, the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, spotting the perfect white silk of her dress. I had no idea he treated his parents this way. I thought it was just some kind of misunderstanding, but Today, I see everything. And I am so ashamed for him. Beside me, my wife, Sarah, pressed a hand to her chest, trying to quiet a heart that was surely hammering against her ribs. I gently guided her back into her chair, but I remained standing, my own heart, a knot of confusion and dread. The bride looked up at us, her voice thick with emotion as she continued. I still have that bag of salmon jerky you gave me, Arthur. I've kept it in our freezer ever since that day we visited. I've treasured it. I couldn't bring myself to eat it because it was the first gift I had ever received from you. I stared at her, stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She went on, her voice cracking. She told the silent room how our son, Michael, had tried to stop her from visiting her own family, calling them country folk. How he was obsessed with his image, terrified his new friends would find out her family worked on a fishing boat. She told us how, one evening, she had taken that little paper bag of salmon jerky out of the freezer, and Michael had flown into a rage demanding she throw it away. Please, he had told her, his voice cold and sharp, don't you dare let that smell get in this house. Every word she spoke felt like a tiny, sharp blade twisting in my chest. The reception hall was utterly still. Not a single person spoke. Some of the guests stared at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. Others looked over at me with an expression of unmistakable pity. Suddenly, Michael was there. He had stormed down from the stage, his face flushed a deep, angry red. He leaned in close and hissed, his voice a low snarl. What do you think you're doing? What are you trying to ruin? But his bride didn't flinch. She wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand and looked him straight in the eye. I am not ruining anything, she said, her voice clear and steady now. I just want your parents to know that the woman marrying into their family is nothing like the son they raised. I clenched my hands into fists at my sides. I could feel my own heart pounding in my ears, a frantic, heavy rhythm. I looked directly at my son, at the man who was once the little boy I'd held in. My arms, the child I'd carried on my back down to the docks on cold, blustery winter mornings. I spoke slowly, my voice quiet but clear enough to cut through the silence. We may have given you things in your life to be ashamed of. Son? Michael opened his mouth to say something, but I raised a hand, stopping him before he could speak. But today, I continued, my voice nothing more than a heavy sigh, you are the one who has made his father feel truly and deeply ashamed. The words held no anger, no volume. They were just the sound of a great and terrible loss, the sound of a father's trust, once so solid, now completely shattered. I bent down and gently took the bride's arm, helping her to her feet. She was still crying softly. Oh! I didn't blame her. I didn't ask her another question. I just looked at her and said, my voice gentle, thank you, at least. At least we have a daughter-in-law who understands. Sarah stood up then. We didn't need to say anything more to each other. We quietly turned and walked away from our own family celebration. No one needed to see us out. No one tried to stop us. Behind us, I could hear a commotion start to build. Raised voices, someone calling a name, a flurry of whispers. But we didn't look back. Because I knew. Anything you have to beg for isn't worth having. And a child who casts his own parents aside, even if he shares your blood, isn't worth keeping in your heart. After we left the wedding, Sarah and I didn't go straight home. We ended up at Union Station in Portland, waiting for a late bus back to the coast. The night had grown cold, and we sat on a hard iron bench under the dim station lights. Sarah held a small handkerchief to her eyes, pressing against them as if she could physically hold the tears back. I felt the same way. We didn't talk. We were both exhausted, not from the long trip, but from the feeling that something deep inside us had fractured beyond repair. I didn't blame her for her silence. There was nothing left that needed to be explained. We were sharing the same ache, a pain so heavy that putting it into words would have only made it feel cheap, too light for what it really was. We finally got back to Astoria in the dead of night. The next morning, I was up before dawn, heading down to the market just like I always did. Everything was exactly as it had always been. The breeze blowing in off the Pacific carried the familiar sharp scent of salt and low tide. The fresh catch glittered like heaps of silver coins in the nets. The other fishermen and the folks at the market stalls greeted me with their usual tired smiles and nods, but I wasn't the same. The filleting knife felt steady and familiar in my hand, but my heart felt hollowed out, empty. When I got back to the house, I put a kettle on for tea and sat down at the small kitchen table. To my left, on the counter, was a framed picture of Michael as a little boy, grinning with a missing front tooth. It was a photograph we once kept on the mantelpiece, the place of highest honor in our little home. Now, I couldn't bring myself to look at it. I opened one of the cupboards and pulled out a thin stack of paper I used for taking down special orders at the shop. It was just a simple blue-lined notepad, the cheap paper a little rough, the kind that soaks up ink and smells faintly of wood pulp and dust. I picked up a pen, its weight unfamiliar in my hand, and I began to write, not to anyone in particular, to my son. To my son, it's been a long time since I wrote you a letter. Do you remember, back when you were in high school, whenever you'd get a bad grade on a test? I used to tear off a little slip of paper from my order book and write, "It's all right. You'll get it back tomorrow." Do you remember that? This time, I didn't write that little note and leave it on the kitchen table. I didn't. Because I was no longer sure, I wasn't sure if there would be anything left for him to get back tomorrow. Today, what I needed to write wasn't to scold him. It wasn't to try and force an apology out of him either. It was just to remember. I just wanted to remember. I set my pen down and took a slow sip of my tea. The warmth of it slid down my throat, but it did nothing to ease the ache that had settled deep in my chest. Still, I had to keep writing. I knew if I didn't get these words out, if I didn't put them down on paper, my heart would never find a moment's peace. "Do you remember," I wrote, "the very first time you ever went out on the ocean? You were only 9 years old back then. I took the whole day off from the market, and I took you out on a friend's boat, just past the breakwater. The waves were rough that day. You got terribly seasick, leaning over the side of the boat, your face pale. But even after all that, when we finally got back to the dock, you looked up at me with the biggest grin I had ever seen. 'Dad,' you shouted, 'I saw a squid.' It jumped right out of the water. I can still see your eyes from that moment, son. They were so clear, so bright with excitement and pride. After that, for weeks, every single night you'd beg me to make my spicy squid stew. You'd always say the same thing. Every time. You'd say it was the best food in the whole wide world. It was in this very kitchen that I taught you things. I showed you how to properly flip a fish in the pan without it breaking. I taught you how to tell a male tuna from a female just by looking at the fins, and how to dry squid so that the delicate wings wouldn't tear. And you told me then, your voice so serious and full of dreams, 'Someday I'm gonna have a bigger fish shop than you, Dad. Even bigger.' I remember I laughed, not at the size of your dream, but at the courage you had to have one in the first place. I had to stop writing then. I reached up and touched the frame of my glasses. The letters on the page had started to swim, blurring into one another. I quickly took my glasses off and wiped my eyes, careful not to let a single tear fall and smudge the ink. "Son, I don't need you to come back here and sell fish with me. I don't need you to go around telling people how proud you are that your father is a fisherman. All I want is for you not to forget. Please, don't forget that you were once a happy little boy in this fish-stinking kitchen. Don't forget that you were once a little boy who was proud of his father." I folded the letter carefully, tucked it into a plain white envelope, and wrote a name on the outside in my neatest hand. I didn't write, "To the President" or "Mr. Michael Morgan, CEO." I just wrote, "From a father to his son." I didn't expect a reply. I didn't think he would call or send some long message back. I just needed him to read it. A few days later, the old landline phone on the wall rang. It wasn't my son, it was my daughter-in-law. Her voice was thick, choked with emotion. "Arthur," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I read your letter to him." I managed a faint, tired smile. I see, I see. I thought that was the end of it. But she continued, her words hesitant. But he still won't admit anything. He just said, "Wow. Dad's a pretty good writer. Sounds like the romantic ramblings of some poor old fisherman." Cool! Hearing those words, a great weight settled in my chest. A profound silence filled the little kitchen, so heavy, it felt like I could feel it pressing down on me. "I see," was all I could manage to say before I hung up the phone. I didn't feel angry. There was only a deep, hollow sadness. It wasn't because he had looked down on me. It was because I knew, with a terrible certainty, that he truly didn't remember any of it. All those days, the days a father and son ate their meals together surrounded by the smell of squid, the days we laughed when a slippery fish flopped right off the table and onto the roof, the days we carried heavy tubs of fish through the pouring rain, all of it was now nothing more than romantic poetry in his eyes. He had forgotten. He had forgotten that his father never went to college, that he didn't know any fancy words, that the only things he had to give were his clean hands and his strong back, which he used to make sure his son never went a day without a meal of fresh fish. That night, I sat alone on the bench in front of my little shop again. The small seafood shack was lit up, rows of dried squid hanging neatly in the window. But I just sat there, my hands resting on my knees, not moving. I looked up at the dark, starless sky and asked myself a question. A child who has forgotten who he is, will he ever come back, just once, to share a meal with his parents like he used to? I didn't know the answer. But I did know this. I would be here, every day, sitting among the smells of fish and squid, holding on to something, waiting until the day he might remember. I don't use social media. I don't know what a TikTok is, and I could never understand why a video that lasts only a few seconds could throw my quiet, decades-long life into such a storm. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon with a light knock on my door. It was Jason, a high school kid who had worked part-time for me last summer. He stood on my porch, holding his phone in his hand, his eyes shining like a kid who had just found something truly amazing. "Mr. Morgan," he said, his voice full of excitement. "Do you know? You're famous now." I just frowned, about to ask him what on earth he was talking about. But he held the phone out for me to see. On the screen was a crystal-clear video. It showed a wedding reception, and there, standing in the middle of the glittering ballroom, was an old man me caught between a bride who was kneeling and crying, and a son who was frozen in place. Then, my own voice echoed clearly from the tiny speaker. "I used to be ashamed of you. But today, you are the one who has truly made me ashamed." I was silent for a long time. It wasn't because I was embarrassed or confused. It was just, I had never imagined that someone had been filming that moment, let alone that those words would spread so far and wide. "This part," Jason said, pointing at the screen. "It's all over Twitter, YouTube, even the news sites. They're calling you the father who woke up millions." I just gave him a weary smile. "I'm not waking anyone up, son. I'm just sad." Jason looked down at his feet, and his voice got a little softer. "But I think those are words a lot of people need to hear. To help them remember they had a family once." Within a few days, things changed so quickly I barely had time to understand what was happening. The shop was suddenly crowded with more people than I had ever seen in my life. At first, it was just strangers, sitting quietly and eating fish. But soon, people with cameras started showing up. Then people live streaming on their phones. Then people who wanted to ask me questions for interviews. A young woman came into the shop one afternoon and took a picture of herself in front of the racks where I hang the squid to dry. "Mister," she said, "can I have a piece of that squid?" "Not to eat. I want to keep it as a memory." An old man visited, said he'd come all the way from Gloucester, Massachusetts. He told me he used to be a fisherman too, but his son had left home 20 years ago and never came back. He put a hand on my shoulder, his eyes watery. We carry the same kind of sorrow, don't we?" he asked. I didn't say anything. I just quietly poured him a cup of hot tea. In that moment, I wasn't a shop owner. I was just a father, sitting with another father, sharing a silence that understood a particular kind of loneliness. That weekend, a crew from a local TV station came by. I was in the middle of grilling some mackerel when a young female reporter walked in and greeted me politely. "Excuse me for bothering you," she said. "We're from a show called The Kind Corner. Quote, we were hoping we could ask you a few questions." I wiped my hands on a towel and gave her a tired smile. "I'm just a man who sells fish," I told her. "Nothing worth putting on television." She looked at me with serious eyes. "That's exactly why it's worth it," she said. The interview was short. Mostly, I just said thank you to everyone for their support. But then she asked me a question that made me pause. "Do you have anything you'd like to say to the children out there who might have forgotten their parents?" I was quiet for a long time. Then I looked straight into the camera. "We're not selling fish here," I said. "We're selling a piece of our heart. And if any children out there feel ashamed of the smell of fish, I just hope you'll remember that smell is what raised you." I don't know if they ever broadcast those words, but I wasn't saying them for the television. I was saying them for myself. And for my wife, who was washing dishes in the kitchen. And maybe, if he just happened to see it, for someone in Portland. A few days after that, a group of high school kids came by. They called me Mr. Morgan and asked if they could film a video review of the shop for their school's TikTok channel. I had to laugh. "You can call me Arthur," I said. "The only thing I could teach you is how to dry squid, and that would only take a few minutes." They all laughed with me. Then one of the boys asked a question. "Mister, are you still mad at your son?" The question felt like a little jab to the heart. "I'm not mad," I answered. "I'm just sad. Sad that he's forgotten what happiness tasted like when he was a little boy." They didn't say anything after that, but I saw one of the kids' eyes get a little red. That night, after I'd closed up the shop, Sarah brought me a cup of hot tea. She set it down in front of me, then sat in the chair beside me. "Do you think he's heard you?" she asked. I didn't have to ask who he was. I just stared out at the damp garden and shook my head slowly. "I'm sure he has. I'm sure he's seen it by now." The moment the words left my mouth, my phone made a little ding sound. I picked it up. There was no name on the screen, just a short message, only 2 words. "I'm sorry, I couldn't move for a while." It wasn't the shock of it. It was because I knew just how hard it was to say those 2 words, especially for someone who once believed they had surpassed their parents in every way. I didn't reply right away. I just set the phone down on a table and tried to calm my breathing. When I looked up, my wife was smiling. It was a small smile, soft as the steam rising from her tea, and it was more radiant than her smile on our wedding day. I don't know what my son will do after that message, but at least I know he started to turn around, even if it's just one step. Sometimes, that one step is all it takes to mend the ties that were broken. Ever since the video went viral, I've tried to live as if nothing had changed. Every morning, I go to the market, wash the fish, hang the squid, grill the mackerel, wipe down the counters and the shelves. Sarah cooks the meals, greets the customers, and counts the day's earnings, just like always. But only I know that ever since I got that message that "I'm sorry, Mom," the rhythm of my life has shifted. I read that message over and over, so many times that I memorized every letter, even the punctuation. 2 words, so short. No explanation, no excuses, no promises for the future. But for a father who had been thrown away, those 2 words were enough to make my heart ripple like the surface of the ocean after a long, frozen winter. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, I just didn't know what to say. I was worried that if I spoke, after all that had happened, the thread that had just been reconnected might snap again. Ugh, I needed the silence. I needed to wait for my son to walk back to his mother and father on his own 2 feet. And he did. He really came back. It was a summer afternoon. The sun beat down on the shingles of the roof for a long time. The squid I'd just finished turning were drying on the bamboo racks. A little breeze stirred. The ocean was calm, and the smell of sunshine was in everything. I was about to pull down the canvas awning for the day when I heard a small sound behind me. I turned around, and there he was, standing there. I have a son. That face hasn't changed, but he's gotten so thin. His hair is a little messy, and there are dark circles under his eyes. He's holding a small cloth bag in his hand, just standing there, motionless, at the far end of the alleyway. His wife is right behind him. She still has that same serene smile and the kind eyes that I remember so clearly from the first time we met, the ones that stayed with me all this time. I didn't say anything. He didn't say anything right away either. For a few long seconds, we just looked at each other. Finally, he bowed his head deep, and in a hoarse, cracked voice he asked, "Dad, Mom, is it okay if I have something to eat?" I sucked in a sharp breath. It was such a simple question, just a few plain words, but they went straight to the softest, most vulnerable part of my heart. I nodded. "Come on in!" But instead of getting food ready inside the house, I suddenly had another idea. How about we go eat down at the pier? He looked up, surprise on his face, and then he nodded. We quietly gathered up the portable camp stove, a few pieces of our dried squid, some grilled mackerel, a container of cooked rice, a bottle of soy sauce, and a couple of cans of iced tea. My daughter-in-law ran to get a blanket, then came back carefully carrying a small wooden box in her hands. We spread the blanket out at the very end of the fishing pier. It was the same spot where my father, my son, and I used to come on weekend evenings, the three of us grilling fish, eating, and just feeling the sea breeze on our faces. My wife, Sarah, leaned against me and whispered with a small smile, "It's the same old pier, but it looks like there's still a place for him here, isn't there?" I didn't answer. I just took a piece of fish, put it on a plate, and set it down in front of my son. Michael picked up his fork, hesitated for a moment, and then took his first bite. "It's still the same taste," he mumbled. I let out a little laugh. "This batch is a little saltier than the old days. I'm getting old. My hand isn't as steady as it used to be." He shook his head, and in a voice so quiet I could barely hear it, he said, "No, it's not too salty. It's me. I'm the one who's been tasting things all wrong." With those words, it felt like everything stopped. Sarah looked down at her hands, and my daughter-in-law bit her lip. I didn't say a word. Sometimes, the most honest apologies aren't meant for anyone else to forgive. Sometimes, a person just has to say the words for themselves. After we finished eating, the sky had grown dark. My daughter-in-law picked up the small wooden box and handed it to me. "Dad, Mom, could you keep this for us?" I lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of old photographs. There was a picture of Michael at 3 years old, riding on my back. A picture of our whole family sitting together in front of the seafood shack. A picture of him and his mother wrapping dried squid together. I picked them up one by one, and my hands started to tremble. At the bottom of the box was an old handkerchief. It was the one Sarah had embroidered his name on when he started first grade. The cloth was faded, but the red thread of his name was still perfectly clear. And at the very bottom, there was a single, neatly folded piece of paper. The handwriting was strong and clear. "I'm sorry, I forgot who I was. But I want to start over, if you'll let me." I clutched the paper in my hand, unable to find any words. Sarah started to cry, her hand trembling as she gently rested it on our daughter-in-law's shoulder. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for bringing him home. I couldn't sleep that night." I sat out on the pier, right where we had eaten our dinner just a few hours before. The moon was rising, and the waves were lapping softly against the shore. I looked at the box sitting beside me, and then I looked up at the sky. And I asked myself, is it just because I'm getting older? Is that why my feelings get stirred up so easily? Or was it simply because it had been so long since I'd heard a truly sincere apology? I don't know. I don't know where my son will go tomorrow. I don't know if this change in his heart is real and if it will last. But there is one thing I know for sure. Today he came home. He didn't come back with the title of CEO, and he wasn't wearing an expensive suit. He wasn't stiff and awkward like he was on his wedding day. He just came home as the person whose name I gave him all those years ago. A child of the coast. The same simple boy who used to share meals that smelled of fish and squid. The one who walked hand in hand with me down this very pier. And that's enough. If today he came home as my son, then whatever happens tomorrow, it doesn't matter to me anymore. My story ends here. To be honest, I never thought I'd tell this whole story. And I certainly never imagined I'd be sharing this part of my life with all of you, right here in front of a little screen. This is the kind of thing you're supposed to keep locked away in an old wooden box tucked away in your heart. But I suppose a crack in your heart will never heal if you just leave it alone. You have to open it up. You have to acknowledge it. You have to be willing to touch it, even knowing it will hurt. I'm not telling you this story because I want anyone's pity. I'm not looking for praise. I just want any fathers or mothers out there who might be quietly enduring something similar. I want you to know, you are not alone. There is a pain that can come from the ones you love, but there are also tiny seeds from which hope can grow. A word of apology, a shared meal, an old box, a hand that reaches out to yours, even if it's late. That's just how life is. We don't know our children the moment they're born, and those of us who become parents, we get lost sometimes too. But if you get the chance, if you have the opportunity to sit together just one more time, please treasure it. Because a chair that sits empty for too long will never be filled again. I once thought I had lost my son. But today, I believe that if I can just hold on to what's true in my own heart, then even the broken ties between a parent and a child can be mended. To all of you, thank you so much for listening to my story all the way to the end. Thank you for giving me your time, for not just listening to an old father's ramblings, but for walking with me through a sadness that, at times, even the people involved didn't have the courage to name. I'll see you all again in the next video. And when I do, I hope to tell a story not of anger, regret, or tears, but a story of love. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for lending me your ears. Thank you so much.